A user cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
All dads should own a Traeger. And this Father's Day, you can win a Traeger smoker grill for your dad and feast on flavorful wood-fire crafted meals. Cooked with a flip of a switch. Cook low and slow or high and fast with digital precision on your Traeger pellet grill. Purchase $35 or more in fuel at 76 Circle K and enter to win. Gas up today and join Circle K's Father's Day package giveaway. A Traeger smoker grill, a canopy, a cooler full of meat, and 2 cases of Bud or Bud Light are up for grabs only at Circle K. Conditions apply. Visit 76CircleKGuam.com.
Off Day, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. Earth Month is a global movement, and it starts here at home. From Jigo to Inalahan and everywhere in between, cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Let's reconnect with our island and join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services. Sunday brunch at Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro is back. Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. $28.95 for adults and $14.95 for kids 5 to 11 years old. Call 479-2652 or 2653 for reservations.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Here we go on another episode of Tall Tales. In fact, the last episode of this week. So sympathize with Jose and I because we're going to have a long drought here, 70 hours of no Tall Tales once the clock strikes 6 p.m. tonight. But we somehow managed to make it through, and we'll be back here Monday afternoon at 1600, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So let's start right out with the Pacific Daily News is part of the Zemi Ikotni portion of the show. So I have not been very kind to the Daily News since they started writing editorials. You know, remember they went for a whole year running boilerplate from USA Today and Gannett News Service, and I was very critical of them, saying over and over again that the key to being a successful local newspaper is to write local editorials about local subjects. But implicit within that criticism was that the editorials that you write about local subjects be of a certain degree of merit. Just saying we are going to write about Guam and then writing Guam is a beautiful island until you fill up the page doesn't quite make it. Well, today's editorial isn't that bad, but I only need to read the first sentence of the editorial and I can stop. First sentence of the editorial says, Guam needs to be very careful about the May 1 target to reopen the island to tourism and easing quarantine restrictions for travelers. And it takes more than a whole page, more or less, just repeating the same thing. So you got to try a little bit harder over there, dude. You know, a good editorial ought to be a little bit edgy. It ought to make people say, wow, when they finish reading it, they ought to be able to say, oh, I didn't know that, or Man, I think they're way off base. I really disagree with their policy call. Or, boy, I'm glad they said that. You know, it's something that really needs to be said, and nobody else is speaking out and saying it. Thank God for the Daily News. It just hasn't worked that way. I think they had one good editorial since they've been writing editorials, and that's it.
Today was Don't Forget to Wear Clean Underwear Day.
Yeah. Brush your teeth 3 times a day, right? Yeah. All right, so let's move on from there to the Post. And the Post is a little better, but it's not a bell ringer either. Blanket restrictions that disrupt high school sports graduation should be reconsidered. So when I read this first time, I said, why would people need to bring blankets to graduations and sporting events? But then I reread it and figured out what they meant. At some point, and we hope it's going to be soon, reason needs to prevail in some of the decisions that are being made by the government of Guam concerning the remaining restrictions that limit the public's movement in the name of Wuhan virus pandemic. But first, a reality check. While we're approaching the halfway mark for the Wuhan virus vaccination of all age-eligible Guam residents, including military service members, we cannot let down our guard. They must have compared notes here with the Daily News. We have seen an uptick in new cases, 13 on Tuesday, and while it's not near the hundreds of new cases we saw last year at the peak of the pandemic, we do need to still be cautious. At the same time, we can keep our guard up, but also return to some of the normalcy? No. Normality with public events where reasonable Wuhan virus precautions can be exercised. There are some moments in the lives of our youth that can no longer be taken back if they continue to be deprived of time-honored traditions. We're talking about graduations and completing year-end sports events among them. As an example, the track and field season that was canceled, delayed, and may be back on schedule, but is still in danger of being derailed at the last minute. The high school inside island-wide track and field season was to take off much later than usual at this time of the year on Thursday afternoon. The solution to comply with the restriction of no more than 50 people gathering outdoors was to group each school's participating team in its own designated spot or outdoor pod at JFK High School track. There is ample space to do that, but less than a few hours before the delayed season was to take off, the organizers were facing the possibility of being derailed by the Department of Public Health, Harassment and Secret Services' initial opinion that it might be an illegal gathering. Leave it to public health. The restriction is affecting an island-wide outdoor non-contact sports event. Each school's team can keep safe enough distance from the other teams, and participants will wear masks even outdoors when they're not on deck for a specific event. Another key milestone in our youth's lives is graduation. Whether high school or college graduation, they are, according to public health regulations, not allowed to be held indoors. It's a blanket rule is seemingly applied regardless of a graduating class's size and without giving each school a chance to present a safe plan. Some schools have smaller graduating class than others. If they have an adequately sized gym or if they can procure a ballroom that will allow for proper social distancing to be met, why not give each school a chance to present a plan? Some of the larger graduating classes might even come up with a safety plan that involves staggering graduation ceremonies. Well, that's what Lou did at her fundraiser. Every half hour, you had to buy a ticket for each one. Why not give a school a chance to present a plan? There are other ways to do graduations indoors safely. Why not give the schools a chance to make a case for their safety plan so students can have a formal graduation inside a gym, a community center, or a ballroom where safety measures can be followed? Why not? Well, because the people who came to the governor and suggested this were met with the classic, off with their heads. The governor's already made up her mind, Now, at the end of this month, the current executive order expires. Will she extend it again, even though the emergency is obviously over? Or if she does, will the legislature subject Tello's purse to eminent domain and have the marshal go in there and pull out the Bob and Ray resolution so we can get this island back so that we can return to normality? Well, we'll find out in a few days, won't we? Okay, next on the card, or before I start the card, I'm going to go back to that list of 10. Remember, I told you yesterday that I had this short feature that I'm going to be presenting over the next 10 days. And what it is 10 politically correct but factually false words and phrases to stop using immediately. To counter the left's lies, conservatives have to use words that accurately reflect the truth, not words that actively mean the obvious. And I started out with mainstream media, and I told you, I read this preparation that says there's nothing mainstream about the mainstream media. When you're talking mainstream media, you're talking about the public communication cartel composed of the New York Times, the WAPO, CNN, CBS, and PMSNBC that do not represent mainstream America. They represent the hard left. And if you delude yourself into thinking that you're reading about what the people of America think by reading those papers, you're doing exactly that. You're deluding yourself. So the next item on this list is gender. Don't say gender when you mean sex. However, I'm going to skip ahead. As you'll remember at the end of the show yesterday, I had a rather regular caller named Another Joe who was talking about pro-life. And Another Joe is such a polite and pleasant fellow. I really had to be very careful because he is such a polite and gentle fellow. But I had to correct him. And I had to tell him, don't use pro-life and don't use pro-choice, because that's exactly what this article is talking about. Talking about pro-life when what you really mean is anti-abortion. So I had a good example of that as I looked through a couple of issues of the Post, Wednesday and Thursday's Post. Starting out with Thursday's Post, which was Thursday's Post, which ran a letter from a gentleman named Paul Zerzan. And if we're going back here to orthography, it would be, if you were going to say it according to Chamorro phonology, his name would be Paul Jurjan. But that's another story.
He's Swedish now.
Yeah.
Sure.
Paul is a rather prolific writer to the editor. He has been on Tall Tales, etc. An extremely smart fellow who has a way of going to the heart of a matter without wasting a lot of time. And this is what he wrote to the Post on Thursday. A letter headlined, "Does an unborn baby have a right to life?" And he said, in her letter on abortion in the April 21 Post, Julianne Flores Baza lists several important problems on Guam concerning sex and women's rights. I think the only controversial item in her letter is the matter of abortion. The abortion controversy concerns a single question. Quote, does an unborn baby have a right to life? Any argument concerning abortion that does not directly address this question does nothing to resolve this debate, but comes across as misleading and deceptive. Please, Ms. Baza, answer this question. Does an unborn baby have a right to life? That was Paul Zerzan. Now I have the letter that Julian Flores Baza wrote. I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing because it is.
It's a book.
And it's exactly what Paul Zerzan decries. I'll just pull out some of the interesting parts of it. She says, if Guam wants to do better regarding reproductive health care, reproductive health care. So this is the definition that the Julian Flores Bazas of the word would use to define, well, I would use to define what they label reproductive health care. The killing of a helpless, innocent human inside its mother's body. That's reproductive health care. And there's nothing reproductive or health care about it. It's a classic example of 10 politically correct but factually false words and phrases to stop using immediately. Don't use the word reproductive health care. And she goes on to say, let us as a community make it so that everyone has access to all the options they need to practice safe sex. Now she's going to list the options available for safe sex. Here are the options. Option number 1, condoms. Option number 2, birth control. Option number 3, IUDs. Option number 4, non-hormonal options. Option number 5, when needed, abortion. So this is exactly what the anti-abortion folks are saying. Abortion for the pro-abortion is just another form of birth control.
I thought the list was safe sex.
Well, it is for everybody except the unborn child.
But none of that was about the act. It was all about keeping the
yes, for the act not to be fulfilled.
Right.
Yeah. So, there's a lot to be said about that too, but just sticking with what Paul identified as an almost axiomatic well, it is an axiomatic statement. You can't get around the fact that an abortion kills a helpless, innocent human being. All right, Flores Baza goes on to say, let us destigmatize the abortion option. Let us destigmatize it. If anything, we should have, like I mentioned yesterday when we were talking Chamorro and the propagation of the language, the left's approach to everything is, if there's a problem in society, I know, let's start a project. We'll create a government agency to handle a project. So if we're going to have a Department of Destigmatization that goes along with destigmatizing the abortion option, shouldn't we destigmatize murder? Your next door neighbor may be a murderer someday. And shouldn't we distinguish robbery and burglary and mayhem and rape and all of these other things? Shouldn't they be destigmatized right along with abortion? Because they all have the same moral underpinning. And the reason that abortion needs to be destigmatized is because people know, no matter how much they're gaslighted, they know that abortion is wrong, that it's an evil. You don't even need to get into sin or anything like that. You just know that taking the life of another member of your own species is wrong. And when that other member of your own species is helpless and innocent, you know, if somebody comes after you with a knife, maybe you're going to have to shoot them. But that's not the case. Here's this poor, innocent, helpless child in the safest place, in the place that ought to be the safest place it is ever in its entire life, being killed by its own mother. Yeah. So we have to destigmatize that somehow.
Because it's about optics.
It's about optics. Yeah, that's all it's about. So we have to destigmatize it. So instead of talking about pro-abortion, can't you say pro-choice? Because then you recognizes the woman's right to choose. And if you're going to say pro-choice, then the equivalent of pro-choice is pro-life. So there's a moral equivalency here. You're pro-life, I'm pro-choice, but we're both right. No! Take that word pro-life. Next time you carry a bar of soap, look in Tello's purse and find a bar of soap. And carry a bar of soap with you at all times. And if you ever catch yourself saying pro-life instead of anti-abortion, stop what you're doing and wash your mouth out with soap right on the spot. All right, and Flores goes on to tell us that, Flores Baza goes on to tell us that these acts are the goals of the Familauan Rights Organization. So for you linguistically challenged folks out there, Familauan is the word for women. Women's Rights Organization. The mission of Familauan Rights is to educate our community about reproductive health and women's rights. Now, it's a good thing that those two terms are connected with a conjunction because they are not equal. You know, they're two separate, totally separate subjects. So if you really are caught up in this idea that a woman has a right to kill an innocent unborn child, your right contrasts directly with that of the innocent unborn child. Yeah, and then she goes on to say this includes advocating fair access to all reproductive options, like abortion is a reproductive option. Now, you know, if these things were said in school in the proper context, whoever said them should be punished for lying. Abortion is not a reproductive option. This movement embodies our goal to heal Guam's relationship with sexual health and help this community reduce and someday eliminate sexual assault. So there's a picture of a straw man right here at the end of her letter. Yeah, the more abortion we have in a community, the fewer incidents of sexual assault we'll have. Anybody could figure that one out.
What is it about pro-abortion letters to the editor and throwing the kitchen sink in there?
Because the argument is so weak. That's why. Because the argument is so weak. So you think if you throw enough other stuff in there, you might hit something that someone agrees with, so they don't come away with saying that letter was really dumb, because everybody knows abortion is killing a helpless, innocent human being. Compare it with Paul Zerzan. Paul Zerzan said more in 2 paragraphs than she said in 2 pages. So let's have a cheer for Paul Zerzan. Yeah, good going, Paul. All right, we turn then to the card. Let's take a break first before we jump into the card.
At GTA, we understand the importance of cybersecurity for your business's digital property. Our multi-threat security bundle provides managed security with professional services aimed to detect and stop malware and internet threats. Let our business solutions experts help your company build resilience with our cost-effective solutions. Safeguard your business today. Call 671-644-1000 or visit gta.net/business. GTA, we start with you.
Half a day, this is Honey. Here at APL, our expertise and extensive network can help you grow your business and reach out to more global markets. As a responsible carrier, APL is also committed to a sustainable future, whether it's protecting the environment or investing our efforts in giving back to the community. Our dedicated teams in Guam, Saipan, and on U.S. mainland are here to support you. Call 588-4651 or visit apl.com.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Yeah, so I got my summary here. Of course, we start out with Steve, and as I promised yesterday, we got a squib here from Troy over at Candid News on the latest. We need to invent a new word. Instead of the latest effort of Steve, I guess it would be the latest non-effort of Steve. Again, as the immortal Joe Cruz has been wont to say, it's not what Steve did, it's what he didn't do. And then we've got we got to talk about the Chauvin verdict a little bit more, probably at the end of the show. And the governor and Senator Nelson, how they were able to demagogue the issue, just like so many of the folks in the mainland who major undertaking is demagoguery. And I'm going to tell you about Mary Torres and her unusual approach to the administrative adjudication law, how Sabina Paris is all wet, but that Anamita Carr, reporter for the Daily News, tosses her a towel. Joanne Brown shows that something brown can be transparent. Brown, you know, her name is Brown. Yeah, okay. And along the same lines, although Joanne Brown shows us what transparency is, the SHPO shows us what it isn't. The SHPO is still opaque. All right, so here we are with Steve. The ink hadn't even been dry on the jury foreman's signature on the guilty verdicts against Derek Chauvin when 7 armed and uniformed Guam police officers entered the property of a young couple Candace previously told you about. This morning, the tenants of 163A, I'll repeat that, 163 Alpha, Estrelita Street in Tamuning, received a disturbing phone call from their landlord. There were 7 cops in uniform, the woman said. One of them said his name is Jed Santo Tomas. He said to call him at any precinct. So I guess if you could call him at any precinct, it's proper to refer to Jed Santo Tomas as they. Then Troy goes on to say they didn't have a warrant, but they were on our property. The landlord recognized a couple of the officers as part of the contingent that raided the home on March 31 when police destroyed tens of thousands of dollars in property and mishandled the female tenant's undergarments. Yeah. And this was all caught on tape. Troy put a little bit of that tape on his website, covered it in his website, and I mentioned it when it came up. Canada turned over 2 hours of surveillance showing the officers destroying the home to the GPD Internal Affairs Division last week. Consistent with what the chief told you during your interview with him, once the video was received, the internal administrative investigation was launched. Police spokesman Sergeant Paul Gene Kelly Tapau said. Or is it? Yeah. Neither he nor Chief of Police Stephen Ignacio have answered whether the chief has opened a criminal investigation against the officers involved. So Candid emailed Ignacio and Tapau and the officer in charge of internal affairs, Lieutenant Ron Titano, inquiring about the ill-timed warrantless appearance by officers at this residence. No response. Are these officers retaliating? Are they rogue? Do they have the blessings of their police chief to conduct themselves this way? Do they have a lead on the person who was casing the joint to steal the chief's motorcycle? Most important of all, does the governor condemn or condone this? The governor this morning, following global news of the conviction of Chauvin, released the following statement. I echo the sentiments of leaders across this nation. This verdict holds Derek Chauvin accountable for his actions, but there's no justice in a system that allows and too often excuses police brutality, especially against people of color, especially the black community. The outcome of the trial will not bring George Floyd back, and it will not end systemic racism. But today we exhale, we mourn, and we continue the fight. This is what she said. Asked whether the governor has anything to say about the local allegations of police corruption, the local allegations, much easier to talk about what went on in Minneapolis, because there's no way anybody's going to hold you responsible for anything you did or didn't do, Governor. But when her director of communications was asked about local allegations of police corruption, Crystal Paco San Augustine, formerly known as Crystal Paco, said she would inquire. Hours later, we have received no response from Guadalupe. Yeah. So talk big, Governor. Virtue signal as much as you can. Get with the mainstream left rap. Accuse the United States of systemic racism and all kinds of other stuff that only does only one thing, to illustrate your own hypocrisy about law enforcement in your own government. All right, let's move on to the next item on the card, which is Carr versus GWA. Anamita Carr is a reporter for the Daily News. Before I get into that, I want to read something that I stumbled across at something called Divots Hub. And the title of it is called Keeping Water Around the World Safe. And there's an article in there by a gentleman named Thomas Spriggs. Dr. Thomas Spriggs, the Environmental Drinking Water Program Manager at Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command, or NAVFAC, Europe, etc., ensures that naval bases across 3 continents have consumable water. And then he says, his presentation, Dr. Spriggs covered the most common sources of water like groundwater, pumped from deep aquifers, or surface water pumped from lakes, rivers, lakes, or reservoirs. He took the environmental science subject to the next level by providing real-world examples from his professional experiences working at Naval Base Guam and Naval Communications Station Adak, Alaska. Dr. Spriggs described how the island of Guam has a natural freshwater lens aquifer and receives an average 8 to 9 feet of rain per year. However, the airfield that his environmental compliance team managed required less than a half-inch of water on the pavement to safely conduct its operations. To resolve this, surface water drainage was routed to underground injection control wells or dry wells, which in turn replenish the island's freshwater lens aquifer. In other words, if there's more than a half-inch of water on the runway at Anderson, they can't use it. So they've built a drainage system, and he's telling us how their drainage system works. Surface water drainage was routed to underground injection control wells, which in turn replenished the island's freshwater lens aquifer. To prevent contaminated stormwater from entering UIC underground injection control wells, the environmental team created easy fixes for specific locations. At one location near a refueling point, they put together an emergency spill kit and painted the entrance points yellow. Then they educated the tenant commands about the wells. In other areas, grass was maintained to encourage sedimentation and contaminant capture before going into the wells. In contrast to preventive pollution, sometimes Dr. Spriggs used science and technology to clean pollution. So it just tells you, this is the Navy that has a command dealing with the water lens. So that when rain falls on the runway at Anderson, it just doesn't run off somewhere. There's a drainage program that drains it through these wells to make sure that clean water goes into the water lens. Now, I've got a couple articles here by Anna Mita, who is a reporter for the Daily News, who, at least in my opinion, bends over backwards for the environmental wackos and the separatists. As an example, there's a story here. Senators get broad support for water resolution. Senator Paris, this is a growing movement. Legislators received testimony in support of Resolution 55 last week, which urges collective efforts to protect Guam's primary water source, the northern lens aquifer, from impacts to the military buildup. The resolution was sponsored by Senator Paris, etc. Calls attention to potential condemnation. And it goes on that line, right? And then it gets down to the real action here. Where Senator Paris says, we all come from our mother's Hanum. We all come from our mother's Hanum.
Water?
Ew. Yeah. How special it is and how much needed that is. It's crucial in so many ways to sustain our lives, in more ways than we could even realize, both physically and spiritually.
Okay.
Jessica Nangauta, an organizer with Proteji Latexan, stated during Thursday's hearing. So you can see where this is going to go, right? Yeah. Marine veteran Rick Paris, who lives in Denver, I think, directed attention to contamination issues in Okinawa, and says he's absolutely horrified by what the Marine Corps is doing in Guam. The resolution further called on the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure that high-quality environment be maintained at all times. It called upon the Department of Defense to prevent further damage related to the live fire train, as though the Air Force had never thought of these things at all.
Remember, we received a call last week from somebody who is an extreme expert and has worked on these
Right.
Environmental impact statements already.
Exactly.
They've done all this.
Yeah, and they've done all that, and one of the things he cleared up was lead. No, lead does not leach into water, no matter how badly you want it to. Supporting testimony was also heard from University of Guam's Green Army President Kyle DeHelig, Arthur Paulino of the Social Work Student Alliance, Bobby S.N. Benavente, etc. I'm sorry, this was Joe Titano, not Anamita. Sorry about that, Joe. Okay, and then the next story, the one where Anamita really gets her teeth into it, increased monitoring for the Northern Guam Lens Aquifer, mounting community concern. So this is a story about the Guam Waterworks increasing monitor of the Northern Guam Lens Aquifer to maintain health of the island's primary source of drinking water. This would seem to be a good thing, right, Jose? And the article says we're just at the beginning stages. There was a recognition with the buildup occurring, both the Department of Defense, GWA, and the island in general. We need to properly manage our water resources. The Northern Guam Lens Aquifer provides more than half the island's drinking water, and talks about 5,000 Marines, etc. And a construction contract for the existing wells renovation was already awarded. The Waterworks hopes to secure a contract for the 7 new monitoring wells soon. This sounds good, right? This is the kind of thing that the Proteji fans ought to say, hey, good job, GWA. We're concerned, and you are too. Glad you're taking good care of that Northern Lens. But then we get to the other half of the story, primary concern. And this is where Anamita gets into it. There is long-standing community concern regarding the aquifer's health in the face of the Marine Corps buildup. It was one of the primary concerns presented to the governor in 2019 by more than 20 community groups regarding the buildup. Some are saying, yeah. Paris last month introduced Resolution 55, which affirms the importance of the lens. Water laws. Bordalio stated that in addition to increasing monitor capabilities for the aquifer, Waterworks continues to abide by laws for clean drinking water, etc. Paris emphasized prevention of harm to the aquifer. Many residents spoke in support of the resolution and expressed concern for the aquifer during the 2.5-hour public hearing. The decisions that are made today regarding the treatment of our land, waters, and air will have long-lasting effects on the people who inherit the land, and that's us, said 16-year-old Kelly Mosga. As oceanic peoples, water is an invaluable source.
Not ocean water.
Our people need clean water to cook, to clean, to nourish our bodies, our plants, and our animals.
Again, not ocean water.
Yeah. So, one would think that if there's a story here, it's the fact that the environmental wackos aren't saying, good job, Waterworks. But no. It just doesn't matter. And if you take the time to read Paris's resolution, every possible thing that could have ever gone wrong is ticked off in that resolution. Whether it ever did or whether it isn't going to, doesn't make any difference. Okay, moving on to, I guess it's time for a short break. By the way, Jose, the eyes of Barstow are upon us, so we better be on our best behavior. Henry Manglonia is back there in Barstow. Ken Brown, we're developing a sizable California. We ought to probably be talking about the recall of the governor of California as a card item, right?
Sounds about right.
Off a day, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. You have an opportunity to make a difference, and it starts here at home. Cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Governor Liu and I invite our community to join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon is back with all your mezcla favorites, like oxtail kadu, Kahlua pig and cabbage, and Chef Peter's style black stew frittata. Mezcla is ready to welcome back everyone with great service in a safe and friendly environment. Come on down and visit Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon, located on the first floor lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Open for lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and for dinner from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Okay, here we are back on Tall Tales. Next item on the card is Mary Torres versus the Administrative Adjudication Law. And this is from an article that ran in the Daily News on the 21st. Concerns arise over efforts to integrate independent adoption agencies. Two bills that would integrate independent adoption agencies into the placement process for children received pushback from representatives of various government agencies during a hearing on Tuesday. Bill 109 would expand the Safe Haven Act to allow for mothers in crisis to relinquish their children to emergency responders and for licensed independent agencies to take physical custody of relinquished children. Bill 108 would streamline the process for the adoption of children on the island by placing adoption agency representatives on the Adoption Selection Committee for Children. The bills were introduced by Senator Mary Camacho Torres in part to ease the burden of Guam's currently strained foster care system by establishing a roster of independent adoption agencies recognized by the Department of Public Health and Social Services. According to Bill 109, the island currently has more than 250 children in foster care served by fewer than 50 licensed foster families. The Ohala Adoption Agency is currently the only independent agency operating on island. Melanie Brennan, director of the Department of Youth Affairs, said she's been collaborating with the Bureau of Social Services since January 25 to address the backlog of referrals of alleged child mistreatment. According to her, the position has given her insight into the current needs of social services. I believe it too broadly enables anyone to set up shop here with a business license, Brennan said of the bills, without first putting in procedural safeguards or regulatory processes to do so. Brennan also addressed the misconceptions about children who are currently in various types of foster care placement, the majority of whom, she says, are currently in relative or kinship placement. She said the last time the Adoption Screening Committee had met for a child to be adopted was in 2017. Wow. So really, if the law is intended to help us with studies, it's really the studies for children in relative placement, which if they go up for adoption or if they're considered under a permanency plan, then that will occur. While opposed to the bill, she recognized the noble intentions while still emphasizing the need for further understanding of how other states and jurisdictions regulate adoption agency and adoptive home vetting. Teresa Archangel. Now, there's a good name to be involved with adoptions, right? Yeah. I suspect Teresa will protect us in battle, Jose.
That would be St. Michael.
Oh, yeah. Teresa Archangel of Public Health also requested for further study into the effectiveness of incorporating nonprofits like Ohala Adoption Agency into the adoption placement service process. before shifting the responsibility for relinquished children from the private to the public sector. According to Archangel, what public health currently needs is sustainable funding. If I had been a senator there, I would have had one of the hangers-on come up and escort Teresa Archangel out the door.
Sounds like they're selling the children.
Well, I've seen people, try to finesse it a little bit. Come in, I'm here to testify on your bill, but what I really want to tell you is we need more money. You don't do that. Currently, the system is working. It's just that they don't have enough resources in order to have greater efficiency as far as work is concerned. And Teresa Archangel, that's not your rap to say. You are not the director. Terry Uggan, Deputy Director of the Department of Health and Social Services and a foster parent himself, welcomed the opportunity to have a roundtable discussion about the current situation of foster parenting and adoptions on the island, but stated that the integration of adoption agencies into government processes feels a little bit like the cart has been put before the horse. According to Uggan, Guam faces many concerns as a port of entry to the United States that other places may not. Human traffic concerns were among them, he stated. So I could see this conspiracy between Ohala and child brokers in, say, Indonesia or Myanmar or some places like that, where the Ohala is the sales outlet for these children that are trafficked from. Yeah, that's really going to happen, isn't it?
Epstein Incorporated.
Yeah. It's a nice monkey wrench to throw into the works there, Terry Uggan. He stated consideration should be given to the regulation and licensing of private adoption agencies that the island would be opening its doors to, many of whom would have their own agendas. Uggan acknowledged the good intentions of the Ohala Adoption Agency, but questioned the embedding of private agencies into the Adoption Selection Committee. We are the government. Let's start a project. Let's create an agency. Speaker Therese Talahi expressed specific disagreement with the wording of Bill 108, especially implementing laws to regulate the selection of adoption agencies that would work with public health. I don't think there's anything to prevent adoption agencies today from putting whatever prospective adopted parents on public health's list and assisting in all other ways that they have described. Senator Chris Duenas came out in support of the necessity of the bill. He acknowledged the concern of many of those provided testimony, but had requested that they provide specific notes as to possible amendments. Senator Mary Camacho Torres stated that any adoption agencies that would be recognized by public health would already need to be in compliance with Guam law. Okay, I got to stop here. Mary Torres, I did a search of Guam law. And you know what I found as far as regulation of adoption agencies?
The Organic Act?
Yeah, the Organic. Yeah, Senator Nelson sent me her copy of the Organic Act. I could find nothing in Guam law that talks about the regulation of adoption agencies. The senator underscored that the main intention of the bills was to address the need for more streamlined adoption policies and provide a lifeline for mothers in distress, but welcome further discussion. The Ohala Adoption Agency was established in 2019 with stated goal of facilitating the adoption of children by prospective families and informing mothers and potential families about their options. So she has something in common with Flores Baza, right? Their options.
Well, I hope option 5's off the table.
Yeah, I suspect it's not. Yeah. Okay, let's break for the big halftime show, and I'll come back to this item on the card right after that.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
More arrests coming. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. From the January riot at the U.S. Capitol.
The Justice Department expects to charge at least 100 more individuals for taking part in a deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol in January. Federal prosecutors noted in a court filing more than 400 people have already been charged. The Justice Department is asking judges to postpone some deadlines related to prosecutions, noting the breadth of the investigation. Last week, a member of the Oath Keepers group became the first person to plead guilty for his role in the breach. Prosecutors say additional defendants are in plea discussions.
Fox's Jared Halpern. House Democrats have passed the bill that would grant statehood to the District of Columbia. It's unlikely to be approved in the Senate, where Republicans call it a Democrat power grab. But the Senate has voted nearly unanimously to approve a hate crimes bill.
Hawaii Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono introduced the bill, citing more than 3,800 reports of anti-Asian hate crimes over the past year.
In a really strong vote, 94-1. Wow, when was the last time we saw that?
Hirono worked with Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, to broaden support for the bill. It was initially focused on hate crimes linked to the pandemic, but Hirono agreed to drop that. And an amendment that had bipartisan support to establish a hate crime hotline was also added in. The new law expedites reviews of such crimes by designating one Justice Department official to review such cases and makes it easier for states to report these crimes to DOJ.
Fox's Jessica Rosenthal. Today will be the second of the White House online summit meeting on global climate. President Biden yesterday pledging to cut U.S. emissions in half by the end of the decade. A car crash in Los Angeles has taken the life of NBA prospect Terrence Clark. The Kentucky freshman had declared for the NBA draft just a few weeks ago. Police say Clark was speeding and ran a red light. America is listening to Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Athletes and celebrities were quick to condemn the Columbus police officer who shot and killed a teenage girl 2 days ago as she was about to stab another teen. But on the street where it happened, a different perspective.
We're hearing from her neighbors, several of whom are telling a very different story.
He literally got out of his vehicle and had seconds to respond. So the video doesn't lie.
Folks who live in the neighborhood where 16-year-old Micaiah Bryant was shot are speaking out. Witnesses describe a confrontation that was escalating until Micaiah charged two other girls with a knife in her hand. One neighbor told the Columbus Dispatch the teen was in full attack mode and needed to be stopped. Another, whose surveillance camera caught the shooting, tells Fox News more people could have died if that officer hadn't taken action.
Fox's Garrett Tenney. Hundreds of protesters marched in Elizabeth City in coastal North Carolina yesterday, demanding body camera video from Wednesday's shooting death of a man by deputy sheriffs. Police in Chicago have arrested a suspect in last Sunday's killing of a 7-year-old girl in a fast food drive-through lane. They report they shot and wounded the suspect as he was attempting a carjacking while trying to flee. SpaceX engineers are preparing to begin loading fuel into the Falcon 9 spacecraft, which is scheduled to launch later this morning, propelling the Crew Dragon space capsule and 4 astronauts to the International Space Station. The federal government will make it easier for people considering suicide to reach out for help.
The FCC unanimously voted Thursday to start a process requiring phone companies to let people send text messages to a suicide hotline. The commission last summer approved a new 988 number to reach a suicide prevention hotline. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline currently uses a 10-digit number. Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel says texting 988 makes sense, noting it's the preferred form of communication for young people. The FCC also says the texting option would help people with hearing loss or speech disabilities. Steve Rappaport, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
The vaccine is officially here, and we aren't just talking about the COVID vaccine, but a financial vaccine at Bank Pacific. We may not be doctors, but we can help you with your financial health. Whether to take advantage of today's crazy low rates, or just a local bank that has your back. At Bank Pacific, we want to help make 2021 your best year yet. Because for 66 years, where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community, yet national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Sunday brunch at Mezcla Bistro in Hagåtña is back.
Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam.
At only $28.95, enjoy your Sunday with your friends and family with their free-flowing house mimosa or house draft beer. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m.
Let Mezcla serve up your favorite local foods. Call them at 479-2652
or 479-2653 to book a reservation. Limited seating available.
Mezcla reminds everyone to be safe and stay sanitized. Sunday brunch at Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
So here we are after that big halftime show that everybody out there in our international radio listening audience enjoys so much. Since the halftime is over, we're now at the second half of Tall Tales. That means I got less than an hour to wrap up all of the really important things that come before me here on Tall Tales every single day. And as I've mentioned before, come 1800, Jose and I turn into pumpkins. Yeah, we don't get resuscitated until 1600 on Monday, a 70-hour hiatus from doing that which we love to do so much, Tall Tales, working with the tailgaters on our international radio listening audience. Well, so be it. Here we are. So I'm still working on the concerns that arise over efforts to integrate into independent adoption agencies. And that's a couple of bills, Bill 108 and 109. Perhaps save 109 until Monday, but here's 108. And I put this on the card, Mary Torres versus the Administrative Adjudication Law. Jose, turn on the Law and Order notebooks. We make laws here at the legislature. That's the lawmaking factory. You put in all kinds of raw material and you flip the switch and turn the crank, and theoretically adopted bills come out and they're sent to the governor, who signs them or vetoes them, and many of them ultimately become laws, and that's how we govern ourselves. Now, there's a second way that laws are made in addition to the way they're made at the legislature, and that is our rule-making procedure, which is covered by a law called the Administrative Adjudication Law. which most fecal, most, yeah, that's kind of what I meant, which most people refer to as AAA because they think it's the Administrative Adjudication Act. Easier to say, but it's the Administrative Adjudication Law. And what that says is that the legislature can delegate a little bit of its authority, provided that it sets out standards to an executive agency to promulgate rules, and that those rules, to the extent that they're valid, have the force and effect of law. You can't do criminal rules that way, but you can do civil rules that way. The idea being that a legislature can set out the broad policy objectives and kind of the boundaries of what it wants to accomplish, but an agency that it works in that particular area might have more expertise in the area that the statute covers to work on the fine points than the legislature does. So this rulemaking procedure has been created. The way it works is that the agency sits down with a sharp pencil and writes out its rules in accordance with the statute, and it has to get the Attorney General to approve and the Governor to approve, and it has to get a fiscal note from the Bureau of Budget and Management Research, et cetera. And when it has accomplished all these things, it sends those rules, those draft rules, to the legislature, which really has only three alternatives. The legislature can look at those rules on the first day and say, man, this is dynamite. We could never do work like this. Let's approve them right away. And the legislature introduces a bill that said the rules submitted to us on May 1st are hereby approved. They pass it, the governor signs it, the rules are approved. Or the legislature can take a look at it and say, man, this is the worst piece of draftsmanship I've ever seen. I want to send a message to these guys. We're going to disapprove these right away. Denied. So they introduce a bill that says the rules that were submitted to us 2 days ago are horrible and they are disapproved. Bill passes, is signed, so on. The third alternative is that the legislature does nothing. And if those rules lay before the legislature for 90 days, then they are approved by operation of law. It's the default provision. Now, the statute is contrary and the statute is wrong, which you'll understand when I'm finished here. Statute says the legislature can modify the rules. Well, the only way the legislature can act is by enacting statute. So if the legislature looks at those rules and says, we don't like it, we're going to change happy to glad every time it appears in those rules and passes a law, then they're not rules anymore. It's a statute because the legislature enacted it. Make sense, Jose?
I'm just filling out my flow chart. Hold on.
All right. Yeah. So, the legislature can approve, disapprove, or allow the rules to become law by the default provision. But the legislature can't jump in and start amending rules without having the disastrous effect of turning the rules into statutory provisions. Now, there's a classic example of this that I've harped about on Tall Tales more than once, and that is the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, which the act was adopted in 1975, and I think it gave the commission something like 180 days to promulgate rules, and, of course, the commission never has. I think a reporter asked Jack Haddock, did you guys ever promulgate those rules? He says, I can't remember. I'll get back to you. Yeah, they've never been promulgated, but at one time, the legislature panicked because the commission didn't promulgate the rules, so they introduced a bill that became Public Law 23-38. And that bill has a title, the Paul Berdallo Rules and Regulations for the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. And it's formatted in the same format as rules. But of course, since the legislature passed and the governor signed, it ain't rules.
Statutes.
It's a statute. And because of the way they did it, if you go to the compiler's website, the Guam Compiler Laws, up on the top, you'll see a tab that says GARR, Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations. And every rule that has been adopted is there. Very convenient. You can look up the rule just like that. Do you find any rules for the Chamorro Land Trust Commission? Nope. Because there ain't none. So you want to find out, you've heard about these, and we went through this in 2018. People were talking, well, the rules say that. And people were saying, I want to see the rules. Where can I find them? And lawyers can't find them because they're not indexed like rules, and because the statute 2318 2338 doesn't use the Guam Code annotated format. They don't turn up in the Guam Code annotated or any of the search tools for Guam Code annotated. So there they sit. And the only reason that anyone would be able to find those rules is if we go back to oral tradition. You know, it's passed down from our, boy, when you grow up, I want you to know that when it comes to the Land Trust Commission, you got to go to 23-38. You can't find it anywhere else. Oh, thanks. Thank you, Grandpa. I'll remember that. That's what happens when people who are drawing pretty good salaries don't know what they're doing. And Bill 108 is a classic example of that. Mary Torres's bill, it was signed on to by Tina Rose Mooney Barnes, Amanda Shelton, Talina Cruz Nelson, who wanted to amend it by inserting the entire Organic Act into it, Jose Pino Terlahi, Joe S. San Augustine, Frank Flores Blas, James Moylan, V. Anthony Atta, and Christopher M. Duenas. So I will now demonstrate what I'm harping about. This is an act to amend sections 1302, 1308, 1310B1A of Article 3, Chapter 1, Title 26, Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations, relative to streamlining adoption policies and procedures in Guam. Now, the Department of Public Health and Social Services could amend those rules if they went through the process that I just outlined. That's why we have rules instead of statutes, because the agency has more flexibility, has more expertise in the area and more flexibility. So as they're tooling along running their agency and they say, we need to fine-tune this rule. Yeah, okay. Go ahead, write it up. We'll start the administrative adjudication law process. You don't have to worry about finding a senator to introduce it or any of that stuff. It is really an intelligent system if you understand how it works. If you don't understand how it works, you're just going to screw it up.
Does everything that gets proposed, every bill that gets proposed, have to have a hearing?
According to the statute, unless the speaker certifies that there's an emergency in public health, et cetera, and the public hearing is waived. The best example of that kind of emergency was when when Judy Wanpat was the speaker, and she and the Wanpat 10 wanted to give themselves emergency salary increases. Now, the agency has to hold public hearings on these rules.
Okay, that was going to be my next question.
And the legislature does too. So it's a well-articulated procedure, and in some senses, if it's done right, it adds a lot to the lawmaking process. But when the legislature jumps in and amends these rules, so if this bill passes, what that means is sections 1302, 1308, and 1310 are no longer rules. They're statutes. And in order to change them, you'd have to come back to the legislature to change them. So it's just a complete shucks canning of the whole regulatory process. Now, if Mary Camacho Torres felt strongly about this and wanted to do it through the legislative process, she would have put the provisions that she wanted enacted into law in statutory form, and then she would have had a repealer, and she would have repealed these rules, clearing the field. It's now a statute. It's no longer a rule. Or she could write a letter to the Director of Public Health and say, I have, my brilliant staff has drafted up some amendments to your rules that I hope you'll consider. Because if you do, I will see to it that I will shepherd these rules through the legislature. But, we jabber a lot about separation of powers. This is a thumb in the eye of separation of powers when the legislature takes it upon itself to jump in and start amending statutes. Now,
it's important because now I understand the huge difference between the two.
And it is a huge difference.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Apparently you don't, but Mary Torres doesn't.
I'll send her a copy of this show.
Yeah, send her a link. Now, the other bill, 109, is just a straight statutory amendment, which is the way things should be done. And I do think that Mary Torres is onto something that we need to work with. And by the way, as far as this bill is concerned, the only major change that it makes that I'm able to pick up is 1308A, composition of the committee. The Adoption Selection Committee shall be composed of, but not limited to, the following 4 ongoing members. 1, the adoption supervisor. 2, the natural parents caseworker. 3, the adoption caseworker and adoption caseworker not involved in the case. 4, a social worker or other staff assigned by the adoption supervisor. So there's something missing here. So the major flaw I see in both of these bills, which I think have salutary purposes, the second major flaw, other than horrible drafting mistake, is that there isn't any licensing procedure for adoption service agencies. And knowing how things work, I wouldn't want to see Mrs. Ferguson's storm door and transmission exchange become an adoption agency. If there's money involved, you have to protect the customers of that particular agency. But the thing that really attracted me here was the trashing of our administrative adjudication law. Okay, going on to the next item on the card, and that is the SHPO versus transparency. And this one starts off really good. This is the Post. Speaker discusses disruption of historic sites during oversight hearing. Now, let me read that again, Jose, and see if you can answer my question. Speaker discusses disruption of historic sites during oversight hearing. So I wonder what the historic sites were doing at the hearing, or were they having the hearing at the sites? And who's this person who stood up and started speaking about it? Speaker discusses disruption of historic sites.
You're just trying to stir up dirt.
Yeah. All right, and here's the key sentence in the entire story. You know, you start out with the most important items, the who, when, where, what, etc., and the most important parts of the story come first, and then as you go down, you get into the interesting but not necessarily essential items, because the reporter never knows how much of his story is going to run. He writes it in that descending order because the editor may have to cut off a couple paragraphs at the end to make it fit the news hole. So you start out with the most important, and you wind up with the nice to have. Now, here's the most important item in this story. Speaker Therese Terlahi delivered emotional statements as she discussed the status of ancestral burials and historic sites with estate archaeologist John Mark Joseph during an oversight hearing Thursday. So what is the most important part of this statement, of this story, Jose? That Therese Terlahi delivered emotional statements. Yeah, that's the first sentence, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth and sixth words of this story. So I got to read the story now to find out how emotional she became. Was she just so distraught that she needed assistance?
Sounds like a sexist headline. I'm woke.
Yeah. And then the story goes on to say, if they were disturbed during the war or while people were using the land, I still don't think that's an excuse, Terlahi said, as she and Joseph discussed sites that had been disrupted by past activity. This sounds more like the script for a play than a news story. I know that the archaeologists, they will list that in every report. Oh, these are pre-disturbed sites, as if it's some excuse that we can go in there and further disturb them. And I think that's wrong, and I want to stop that practice on Guam. Yes, things were disturbed, but I don't think that gives anybody the right to lessen the protections of these burial grounds. With everyone that gets cleared, we left with less and less, she added. So Therese Terlahi was emotional. Now I get to the real center of this story. Now, if you're going to discuss these burial sites and how the remains and artifacts that are discovered are handled, are not handled, should be handled, weren't handled, who is the key person to have in this discussion?
SHPO director.
The SHPO, absolutely. The acting SHPO. A certain Carlotta Leon Guerrero, who doesn't want, who is really protective of those archaeological relics and remains, so protective she doesn't even want anybody to talk about them. Okay, so you would expect, I would have expected, that the SHPO would have been in the first paragraph of this story, if that's what it's about. But here it goes. Due to medical reasons, acting State Historic Preservation Officer Carlotta Leon Guerrero could not attend the oversight hearing, which was held to discuss the status of ancient human remains and burial sites, including those discovered at the construction to develop Camp Bloss. She could not attend. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know you came to enjoy an opera tonight, but before the opera begins, I have one announcement. Pavarotti can't make it, but we'll go forward with the opera anyhow. Yeah, if the SHPO isn't there, then all you're doing is giving Therese the opportunity to engage in emotional statements, and the whole effort kind of looks like nothing more than that. Nelson, who oversees the committee that has oversight over Guahan preservation, recessed the oversight until May 4. Anyhow, really important story. Terlise Terlahi was emotional, and the shippo didn't show up. That's about all you can pull out of that story. Okay, next on the card is Taurus versus the United States District Court. I've got a break for the 7th inning stretch. And I've got another Joe on the line who wants to talk about the shippo. So we'll come to another Joe right after the 7th inning stretch.
Today, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. You have an opportunity to make a difference, and it starts here at home. Cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Governor Liu and I invite our community to join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Nicholas. If you are a small business, you may be interested in a federal program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This program can provide federal funds to match equity investments into your company or help you get lower interest rates at local banks. To find out more on how this program can help your small business, please contact your Guam Congressional Office at 475-6453 or at michael.sanicolas@mail.house.gov.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the Office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Seventh inning stretch, Wrigley Field in Chicago. One of my favorite places, Wrigley Field. That means we only got 2 more innings of Tall Tales to go. And I'm going to go from Wrigley Field to the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. But before I get there, I'm going to chat with Joe. Is it Joe?
It's another.
It's another Joe. Okay. Another Joe. Good afternoon.
Hey, Bob. What's the word here I'm looking for? It's kind of conspicuous that everyone is kind of nowhere to be found. They're making themselves scarce for one reason or another. If the shippo is not feeling well, should there be another temporary replacement shippo?
I don't think so. You know, when a person is assigned a particular responsibility, and that's what they tried to pull off here. They tried to have the archaeologists come in. But if you are the shippo, then you come to these hearings. And if there is a medical dimension that you can't come, then the way it should be treated, the chairman of the hearing should be notified, the chairman of that committee, and it should be postponed until she can come. We want to have a public hearing dealing with the Federal Reserve Board, and we're going to have the chairman of the Fed come in and testify before Congress. Sorry, folks. The chairman of the Fed had the sniffle, so he thought it better he stay home. So we're going to have his secretary do it. No, it's just not the way you do things. You know, if you have important titles, then you got to be there.
Isn't there something that the news people, the media, should be picking up on? The PDN, the Post, their various talk show hosts. Well, you did. How many hints should you drop, Uncle Bob?
Yeah, really.
What is it you like to say? It isn't what they did, it's what they did. Everyone's not doing what...
It's the Silver Blaze. When Sherlock Holmes was called in to find out who killed the champion racehorse, the Silver Blaze, he investigated, he asked a lot of questions, and he was asked, well, what really stuck out in your mind, Sherlock Holmes? And Sherlock said, the peculiar activity of the dog. Now, the owner of the stable in the house had a dog. What was it that the dog did was peculiar? Sherlock Holmes said, nothing. The dog didn't bark. And because the dog didn't bark, that meant that obviously the dog recognized the killer. And that's how Holmes solved the murder, the killing of the horse and the Silver Blaze. Well, the real Joe Cruz picked that up and was very sensitive to situations where it wasn't what someone had done or what someone had said that was the key. It's what someone hadn't done or hadn't said that was the key.
And about, do they collect a paycheck, these SHPO officers?
Leon Guerrero is in the governor's cabinet, so I suspect she's knocking down $100,000 as a special assistant. I don't know how much Patrick Lujan probably made around 75 out at Parks and Rec, but I'm just guessing.
It's just starting to feel like that whole superintendent of DOE deal, where they ended up paying two guys for the same job at the same time.
Yeah.
So well,
I remember that.
So I don't know what to say about it. Let's see if anyone picks up on your hints from the other media organizations. But before I stop bugging you, Bob, would you say it's fair to characterize the experiences and the so-called relationship we have with the COVA countries as human trafficking?
The what in the so-called COVA?
He snuck it in.
Yeah, you snuck it in, but you stumbled onto something there because there was a huge scandal that emanated from the Marshall Islands.
Blue Lounge?
There was a lawyer in, I think, Utah who had a connection in the Marshalls and knew some Marshall expatriates, and he had a capper in the Marshalls who would persuade young pregnant females, you really ought to go to the U.S. and we'll pay your way to the U.S. and you can have your baby there, and we'll give them to a family for a while and you can get the baby back. And he was charging like $10,000 a baby for this or something. Yeah, it was really a scandal. And the United States government and the Marshall Islands government caught up with it, and I think the attorney's probably going to be doing a long stretch in the Crossbar Hotel because of it. It was pretty egregious. So, what's his name? Terry Uggan obviously was aware of that and perhaps intended to capitalize on something that has extremely small likelihood of happening here, that people would take children from the Marshall Islands and bring them here and sell them, which is basically what happened to those Marshall Islands kids.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, Kabal, I want to leave you with this. Was it my attempt to imitate what was it, Al from Happy Days, the second owner of the diner? You say yep.
I didn't understand what he said. Did you?
I got the reference. Yeah.
Yeah. The owner from the diner in Happy Days. Okay, Bob. Thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, another Joe. Thanks for hanging up so soon.
There were two owners of the diner in Happy Days.
All right.
I think one was the character that Pat Morita played, and the other one was I can't remember who the actor's name was, but his name was Al. And every time something happened, he would just bob his up and down and go yep, and walk away.
Oh, okay. That's really important information. I don't know how that ever escaped.
The lead up took longer than the quote.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next I've got on my calendar here, Torres versus U.S. District Court. And the Torres is Ralph Torres, and the U.S. District Court is the District Court of the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. And I'm going to give you a little background before I plunge into this. And that is that Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution creates a judiciary. The judiciary is, I'm going to say it anyhow, is manned by judges. No.
How dare you?
Yeah, a lot of those judges are of the female sex. But we started out with the idea that judges would be men. No, they're not. So the judiciary is judges, and a judge is appointed by the President of the United States. He or she, they, are confirmed by the United States Senate, and they serve for a term. Now, how long is the term of a judge in the United States? Good behavior. In other words, it's a life term. A judge, there's no limit to the term of a judge. So if you're appointed when you're 30 years old and you live to be 100, you could be a judge for 70 years. Life term for judges. That's district court judges, judges on the courts of appeal, and Supreme Court judges. It's called life tenure. And the advocates of life tenure say it's absolutely essential that judges have life tenure because they can then afford to be independent. They don't have to worry about making a decision that will aggravate someone, say in the legislature, who will cut their appropriation, or in their executive branch who will do something that they don't like, et cetera. They're independent, and because of their life tenure, we hope that they have the ability, they're in a position to be completely impartial and not be swayed by outside factors, like the persuasive techniques of Black Lives Matter, like burning down cities and things like that. We hope. So that's the setup. Now, in the territories, except for Puerto Rico, judges do not have life tenure. A judge in the District Court of Guam or in the District Court of the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas is appointed for a 10-year term. At the end of that term, if they are not reappointed, then they're out on their black robes. They're out. So the theory is that this has an impact on judicial independence, that a judge might not be as independent if that judge knew that his term was limited to 10 years. And you can hypothesize a lot of things. Those kinds of appointments are vetted by the Justice Department. So at least in theory, if you have a judge who repeatedly rules against the United States, somebody in the Justice Department would say it'd be really nice if that judge isn't reappointed because she always rules against us. I don't know if that happens or not, but it's something you can speculate on. In our situation, Judge Gatewood's term expired several years ago, but she's still on the bench because no president has, the last president did not appoint her replacement until it was too late for the Senate to act upon it. Judge Sanzun was appointed to the bench of Guam, but the term of the Congress ended before she could be confirmed, so Judge Gatewood continues on. So I think Judge Gatewood is an extremely good judge, and I've always been a Judge Gatewood fan. But if one were to speculate, one would speculate that Judge Gatewood would not want to rule against her political betters here in the territory, because conventional wisdom holds that when a district judge is appointed in the states, senators from the state in which the judge will serve will give their advice. Advice and consent is what the Constitution says. And if Senator Ronnie Johnson from Wisconsin says, I don't want Klitzkie on the bench in the district, in that southern district of Wisconsin, I'm not going to make it, because that would be the end of it. Guam, the territories don't have senators, so that particular role then defaults to the person in the same party of the president of the highest rank. So for us, now we have a Democrat president, we have a Democrat governor, and we have a Democrat representative in the House of Representatives. How much bearing that would have on the reappointment of Francis Gatewood, I don't know, because Governor Lulian Guerrero did recommend that Gatewood be reappointed. We didn't hear San Nicolas chiming in and saying, I agree with the governor on that one. So I'm going to ride this one down the home stretch, but I got to take a minute now and go to Churchill Downs.
Happy Day, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. Earth Month is a global movement, and it starts here at home. From Jigo to Inalahan and everywhere in between, cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Let's reconnect with our island and join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Listen to The Point. Any speaker, anytime. Check us out on your FM radio at 93.3, 104.3 HD3, thepoint.gu, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and tune in. And announcing radio.com. Download the app and hear The Point. Get the latest news, sports, entertainment, and more. On demand. Your phone is digital. Your life is digital. And we are too. 93.3, The Point.
The home stretch here on Tall Tales from Churchill Downs all the way back to the historic studios of The Point here in Upper Tumum. I'm going to go into Torres versus the District Court, but for just a second, I'm going to refer to today's card. The last item on the card, and obviously I'm not going to get to it, is Chamorro versus Chamorro, with the alternate orthographies used to spell the words. And I'm going to once again use that item to comment on the silliness of what we're trying to do here in the name of preservation of Chamorro. But I peek at the card and I see our Chamorro informant here, Elwin Champaco Quitino, once again enlightens us by saying, forget about going to the burial grounds wearing sinahis and doing silly Hispanic form chants, because the spirits wouldn't comprehend a single word they'd utter. If anything, they'd laugh themselves back to sleep, wondering why so many people would be wearing a net weight around their necks. In other words, a weight that you use to weight down a sinahi. Oh, Ghost tomorrow, Junai, Atanai Isinahi. Thank you, Elwin.
Something you wear when you're going to go sleep with the fishes?
Something like that, yeah. All right, so here we are with Titan over Izur Torres versus the District Court, and I've explained life tenure and the fact that District Court in the territories do not have those judges do not have life tenure. And it's something that I've beat the drum for many, many times. You know, instead of getting all bound up in the separatist argument, what we ought to do is embrace the position that we are in the American empire, do what we can to improve our position, such things as a judge with life tenure. And the article that I'm about to read makes the point that I make in spades. And it's... once again, it's from Candid News. Troy Torres, our own 21st century muckraker. Governor Ralph Torres of the CNMI told Lieutenant Governor Arnold Palacios he refuses to recommend federal judge Ramona Manglotnia to continue on the U.S. District Court of the NMI bench because she signed the search warrants upon his home and office. This is according to conversations between Palacios and Congressman Gregorio Khalili Sablan. Manglotnia in November 2019 signed search warrants allowing the Federal Bureau of Investigation to search Torres's home and the governor's office, along with the offices of the Chinese-owned casino operator, Imperial Pacific International, LLC. The warrants were based on evidence and probable cause presented by the FBI that fruits of crimes existed at the locations to be served. Interesting story. Now, this is not Dateline. This is Tall Tales. One warrant and receipts revealed the FBI seized evidence of money laundering, fraud, corruption related to Governor Torres, all of his brothers and all of their wives, except for one. Story doesn't tell us anything about her purse, but she probably paid for it herself. The investigators seized documents pertaining to their income, houses, vehicles, boats, land transactions, artwork, jewelry, and even travel. The FBI seized from Imperial Pacific main offices hundreds of boxes of documents relating to receipts, payments, contractors, corporate structure, payments to the Torres brothers, some wives and business affiliates, and purchases of purses. It was Judge Manglotnia's signature that made those seizures all possible, and Mr. Torres hasn't forgotten it. He made sure to send that message through his lieutenant governor to CNMI's delegate to Congress. Here's what Sablon told Candid News. Quote, so during the Biden administration and since, I knew that Chief Judge Manglotnia's term ends by summer of this year. I spoke with her and asked her if she would be willing to continue her service to the court. She said yes. And so I decided that I will recommend her name to the Biden administration, just as I did in the Obama administration. But I thought I would ask the governor if he wanted to join me in recommending the judge. I went through an emissary that was close to the governor. After 2 weeks and no response, I decided to go through a second emissary, the lieutenant governor. He was then in Arizona for medical reasons, but we connected and I asked him if he would ask the governor if he would be willing to join me in recommending the judge. The lieutenant governor agreed to ask and get back to me. After a few days, I called the lieutenant governor again and asked him if he got word back to the governor. He said yes, he did. And he was sorry that the governor will not recommend the judge because she signed his search warrants. This is what the lieutenant governor told me. So I submitted the chief judge's name for consideration for another term as chief judge. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. So, how much weight Governor Ralph Torres's non-recommendation will have with President Biden, I don't know. How widely this information will be spread, I do know. And that is that every lawyer in Saipan is talking about this all the time. And every lawyer in Saipan who would have some desire to be the district judge, is going to say to himself, this governor, when I get near the end of my term, if Torres has anything to do with it, I mean, you can see where this is going.
Sounds like very similar to what Maxine Waters did.
Yeah, he's actually poisoned the well here for anybody who wants to be a judge, because he's sending out the message, when I'm governor, don't you do anything that's going to cause me any grief, like signing a search warrant, for example. And that's what judges do. You can't get a search warrant. It is an important part of the Bill of Rights, the right of the people to be secure in their houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, particularly describing the place to be searched and people to be seized. That's extremely important.
Unless you're searching someone who can sign a recommendation.
Exactly, and then you better not. So a classic argument as to why federal district court judges must have life tenure. And a classic example why our politicians should stop renaming Enarahan and do something substantive with the time. That is, even if they have to get somebody else to hold their purse. Therese, I want to introduce this bill about life tenure for district court judges. Can you hold my purse? Tello said. All right, so let's see. I've got somebody who wants to chime in on this subject. It's another Joe. Wow.
Another ride.
Another Joe. Second ride on the Ferris wheel, another Joe.
Yeah, Bob, weren't you talking about this like for how many months? Did you say that the governor was somehow connected to these casinos and money laundering?
I have, yeah, I have covered that before, and I've in the context that you'll hear some of the economic savants here on Guam saying, "All we need to do is legalize casino gambling, and we wouldn't have to worry. We'd be bringing in so much money in taxes." And I once again, the CNMI has showed us exactly what not to do. It's turned out to be a huge disaster for them. Corruption, the casino is not paying, everything about it has gone wrong. And the streets are still paved with cascajo instead of gold in the Northern Marianas.
Well, maybe someone, let's say from the Post or PN or, someone who's maybe the Vigilance Committee, I don't know, should hire this judge from Mangalunya and get some more information about what is it, hundreds of millions of dollars, about? How much are we talking about here? It's like more than any other casino in the world, was it?
Yeah, there's big money involved there. At the beginning, when the casino first opened, they were opening in a temporary building, and the take and the handle, in other words, the money that went through that casino was more than went through the largest casino in Macau. And the largest casino in Macau looks Caesars, and your Vegas casinos look like tent camps. So it was obviously, because there's some quirks in Chinese currency law where you can buy an advanced vacation using Chinese yuan, and then when you get to the U.S., you can redeem some of that what you paid for in U.S. dollars. So classic channel for money laundering.
Would you say that these are government officials in China, or more of the mafia elements?
No, I didn't say that. It's the kind of thing I'm capable of saying, but mafia. The mafia is mostly Italians. There are very few Chinese in the mafia.
Sorry, Triad.
Marco Polo did bring them together.
That's true. Yeah, the story is that Marco Polo brought spaghetti from China back to Italy because Japanese are great on noodles, right?
Kabal, they say follow the money, right? So, yeah, I think it's important to find out where did all this money go, and did some of it end up being invested in Guam?
Well, some of it went into Governor Torres's pocket, according to some of the stuff we've read in the paper, and that's why he was so angry about these search warrants, and that's why he doesn't want to see Ramona Manglotnya continue as a district court judge, because if she did it once, if she has the opportunity to do it again, she'll do it again. Unless she got scared off here by this one, which I kind of doubt.
Okay, Bob, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, another Joe.
And
yeah, so and what most people would see is an esoteric point. Our judge is not appointed for life. Oh, judges in the states are. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, that's interesting. Pass the black-eyed peas. But it's an extremely important point when we're talking about the C word, when we're talking about corruption. We had a governor of Guam who was found guilty of official corruption. We had a local judge, Judge Duenas, a man with a stout heart who stood up to it. But we might not always be that lucky if the judge knows his term depends on his ruling. All right, well, Jose and I got to crawl into a hole and pull a hole in after us until 4 o'clock Monday afternoon, and we'll see you then.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Near unanimous support for an anti-hate bill. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Passed by the Senate Thursday with just one dissenting vote, the bill targets a rise in crimes against Asians.
This legislation sends a dual message to our Asian American community. We will not tolerate violence and bigotry against you. And to those who perpetrate the violence and bigotry, we're going to pursue you to the full extent of the law.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the bill, which directs the Justice Department to more aggressively prosecute hate crimes related to COVID-19, heads next to the House. Senate Republicans are offering their version of an infrastructure bill,
putting forward a plan they say represents the largest infrastructure investment Republicans have ever made.
Core infrastructure, physical infrastructure. What do people think of in our states when they think about infrastructure?
West Virginia Republican Shelley Moore Capito says the focus is on critical needs and would spend about $600 billion, far less than the $2.3 trillion in spending proposed by the president.
We certainly welcome any good faith effort and certainly see this as that.
Press Secretary Jen Psaki says President Biden plans to meet with more bipartisan groups of lawmakers after next week's address to a joint session of Congress.
Fox's Jared Halpern has expected the House has approved a bill that would make the District of Columbia a state, but the bill faces long odds in the Senate. 4 astronauts have arrived at the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center. In just under 2 hours from now, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is expected to boost them to the International Space Station. A car accident in L.A. has taken the life of NBA prospect Terrence Clark. He was just 19. Wall Street retreating Thursday, the Dow losing 321 points. NASDAQ and the S&P 500 both lower, but early morning Dow futures are ahead more than 80 points. Asian stock markets have closed Friday mixed. America is listening to Fox News.